Who is going up from the championship in this season? Well, today I'm hoping to potentially answer your question. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Lex Alexas. We actually have a unique video that is not a score predictions video. I actually can't remember the last time I did that. Probably my table predictions. So it has been a while and I apologize for not doing more of this content. I've been really busy, but considering how competitive this championship season is, promotion, top 6 and relegation still being undecided and could really go down to the wire, I think I need to dedicate a video for all 3 of these sections of the table and tell you my thoughts and my predictions in these sections of the table. Now, after I actually cover all those 3 parts of the table, I'm going to release my final table predictions. Don't have a date of when I'm going to do it yet, but I definitely want to do it very soon. So today we are going to be covering the promotion. So I'm going to talk to you about the 4 teams that I'm still considering who could still get promoted from the championship. I'm going to break a lot of things down, and right at the end of the video I'm going to tell you my final top 4 predictions and ultimately which 2 teams are going to be in the playoffs and which 2 teams are going to be automatically promoted back to the Premier League. If you guys like what you see, please smash the like button. It really does help. Please do hit the subscribe button too if you've not done so. It really helps. And please also share the channel too. All 3 of these things are free to do and they really do help. But without any further ado, let's start breaking down my thoughts of this crazy championship promotion race. Alright guys, so let's start things off by looking at the current championship table with about 5 weeks left in the season. Leeds and Leicester are currently occupying the top 2, and they will be the 2 teams as it stands who are automatically promoted back to the Premier League. Now, Leicester occupied the top of the championship, I think, for over 150 days. But Leeds have now entered their first couple of days at the top of the championship. Our watch along of Leeds and Millwall was the very game that allowed Leeds to be top of the championship for the very first time this season. They are both on 82 points. Leicester do have the advantage of having a game in hand over Leeds United, so they do have a slight advantage in the current predicament, but they do have Southampton to play, where Southampton are one of the 4 teams I consider who could still get promoted. They're definitely going to not make that easy for Leicester. A little bit below them in 81 points is Ipswich Town. Now, one thing you may notice with the top 4, it has contained the 3 relegated teams from the Premier League, which is the argument of the quality of the Championship and the Premier League really being tested more than ever as having a massive gulf in the quality. Ipswich are the one exception to that, to actually get within the mix of that cluster of the table. Ipswich have been incredible this season, which is why they've been given so many plaudits, because very few, a couple have, but very few have predicted Ipswich to be in this position of the table as it stands. Now, I do think it's going to be very difficult, but we have seen with that incredible start to the season what sort of run they could really go on. So I do anticipate that top 4 being incredibly competitive, because all 4 of these sides have gone on incredible unbeaten runs at some point of this season. Now, what I'll be looking at is I'll be looking at the running for all 4 of these sides. I'll be also looking at their current injury situation and also potential players in their starting 11s that could risk facing suspension. Because one thing that you're going to notice within the running of the games, there is a very small gap in between them. When you think about it, you've got 5 weeks to fit in 8 games, some of them 10 games. So it's very likely you're going to get an average of 2 games a week. So at this moment of time, if you do have an injury that can take a couple of weeks to heal, that could be over half of the running. So right now we do need to consider the strength and depth of all 4 of these squads. Now, depth I think is quite strong for all 4, but I do think the quality of the depth is slightly stronger than others. So before I'm going to break down each team one by one, let's look at what you guys think regarding the situation. So very interestingly, I did a poll on my community tab based on who you think is the most likely to get promoted from the Championship to the Premier League, and the results are very interesting. So with 59% of the votes, you've gone for Leeds United. Leicester second with 26%, Ipswich 13%, but then a sharp decrease down to Southampton with only 2%, probably only one vote out of everyone who has voted. Thank you everyone who did participate in that poll. It does make for very interesting reading, because I guarantee if I did this poll a week, maybe even 2 weeks ago, I think that would have been Leicester and Leeds swapping positions. So Leeds' recent form has really allowed people to believe that they could go on and win the championship outright. But we're not only seeing who we think can win the championship, we want to know who's going to get promoted, you know, outright. So Leicester and Leeds, definitely the majority of people's views of who will be going up. You've got a small cluster of people who think Ipswich could do something. Southampton, final way, the least likely out of the four. Now, Southampton is going to be a tough one, as we will discuss with them very, very soon, because they have 2 games in hand, you know, rather than the 1 game in hand that Leicester have. So that could potentially change things, but it is still going to be a lot for Southampton to do to get them in the top 2. They will need teams to drop some points along the way. If we can see a projection of points going in, if Leeds win all their games, so that is 8 games, so 8 wins in a row, they can match Reading's 106 point record. They cannot mathematically beat it anymore, but they can match it. And potentially they could beat it with goals scored or goal difference, depending how they decide to differentiate between the two. But the maximum points that Leeds can get is 106. Because Leicester have that game in hand, Leicester can go up to 109 points. So what's interesting to me is that if any of the sides of Leeds and Leicester, if they lose any of their games, they cannot beat Reading's 106 point record. So you do got to give Reading some credit for maintaining that really, really strong record. I think it may be safe and intact. However, one thing I think we could maybe see, which you're going to have to tell me in the comments if this has happened before, I think we could get a situation where we have maybe 2 teams that get 100 points or more. I can't think of a single EFL Championship season where that has happened. I've remembered seasons where we've had a runaway leader getting over 100 points, but I cannot recall 2 teams getting over 100 points. If that happens, I think that could potentially be history made, unless you guys know a situation where that has happened. And if you do let me know in the comments down below. I'll be very interested to know. In my final top 4 predictions, I'm going to tell you not only the places, but I'm also going to tell you the amount of points I think they could get as well. So let's break down each side. So Leeds United first, I think we've got to break down. They're currently first place. As I mentioned, this is their first couple of days at the top of the championship. It's Daniel Farke, who has got Norwich promoted from the championship in 2 occasions. And this is his 4th season as a championship manager, I believe. So 1 season, you know, Norwich kind of trembled around mid-table. It was his first championship season with Norwich. But then the last 2 seasons in the championship, he spent time with Norwich. He got them to 2 promotions, and not only 2 promotions, but 2 titles in the championship as well. With Leeds United, obviously they had a tricky start. They started pretty slowly, but then as soon as they got some things balanced and they improved their defence, because it was pretty clear their attack was good for all of the season, but their backline was leaking too many goals. They've now found a way to keep a good streak of clean sheets together. They've got a good defensive record currently, and they're scoring so many goals. Now, I do think it helps with the squad valuation. I think only Leicester have a slighter squad valuation than Leeds. So I do think squad value is producing those really good results and stats there, but they still got to have the stamina and the endurance to turn these teams over week in, week out. So I'm really, really impressed how Leeds have really got themselves fighting for this position. So let's look at the final 8 games for Leeds United. So you can see here for Leeds United, they have got 8 games to look over. So there are a couple that I do want to bring to your attention. We are going to see a couple of teams repeat over and over again There's very few teams actually that just have one of the top 4. So the first game Leeds have to play is Watford away. Very interesting this, because this is Tom Cleverley's second game as Watford manager, or interim manager. I should probably use the correct title there. They got their first win in, I believe, 8 games with Cleverley stepping in as interim coach. So Watford could potentially be a banana skin game for Leeds. Now, I think a lot of the reason people are backing Leeds in the moment is their momentum. And one thing I will say about the momentum is, I do think with this international break, I think you've almost got to wipe the slate clean with momentum. Because there's now this substantial break in between games, I think it's going to be very difficult for these sides to pick up where they left off. It's going to take something miraculous for that to happen. So I do think, in a way, it is really going to be down to the games that they got in front of them and the squad availability. So I'm not basing my predictions based on past momentum, because I do think that has now been given a standstill because of this international break we're currently in. So going back to the fixtures, you can see that they've got some pretty tough games, and the 2 games that stand out to me back to back are the 2 teams trying to chase for the top 6. Now, I'm going to do a separate video about the top 6 race, but Hull and Coventry back to back, I think, is very, very interesting. So Hull, of course, and Coventry are only just below the top 6, and they really got to be really, really strong in this final couple of games or so if they want to have a chance of overtaking Norwich, who currently occupy that last playoff place. So I do think that will be quite difficult for Leeds. But a unique thing about Leeds is that they are the only team unbeaten at home all season. And in fact, I think the only other team I can think of in the Championship who went through a whole season unbeaten at home was Newcastle, actually, under Chris Hughton in 2010. So for home games, Hull, Sunderland, Blackburn especially, I think they can get 9 points out of 9 potentially. Maybe Hull could throw a draw, which will make still 7 out of 9, which would be very strong. Southampton, final day of the season, 12:30, Sunday kickoff, I think can be very exciting. Now, by that time, Leeds may have already done enough to get promoted. Maybe that could be the game that defines if Leeds can get champions. So that could be a good motivation for Leeds to go for this game. Southampton, if they've had an incredible run, they could look at this game thinking, right, maybe they could have a chance to get something here and hope results go their way to get that final promotion place. So there can be a lot riding on this game. Middlesbrough, I think, is going to be interesting, but I think around that time, this is going to determine how Middlesbrough go around their form. Because Middlesbrough at this moment of time, I don't think will get in the top 6, but the only way I think they will is if they go through a great run of form. And I think if they do get a strong run of form at this stage of the season, I think that game that Leeds will have to play will be very tough. QPR, with that being the penultimate game of the season and QPR's last home game this season, I think that's going to be tough, especially if QPR have not guaranteed survival yet. So there's a lot of if, buts and maybes in other sections of the table which will determine whether Leeds will have a tough time in their away games. And I think Coventry away is their toughest game, because Coventry, I think, as a standard of quality, I think have really got a lot of good things going for them at the moment. And I do think they really need to be going for their home games and aiming for 3 points if they do want a chance of getting into the playoffs. So that is my thought of Leeds' last couple of games or so. Let's now go and see their current injury crisis, if there is a crisis, and players that risk facing suspension. So if you look here at this graphic, so you can see the injuries. Now, Stojic is like the only one who has featured this season, who has picked up an injury. He picked one in the Boxing Day round of games and has been out since. We do not know the return yet, but since he's been out, Leeds have actually kept a lot of good clean sheets this year. The risk of suspension does make things interesting. Now, the only one close to getting a 1-game suspension is Dan James. He's picked up 4 yellow cards, so 1 more yellow card could allow Dan James to have a 1-game suspension. So I do think still with Dan James, that's actually not going to be too horrific for Leeds, because he didn't even start for Leeds against Millwall and they were still winning quite comfortably, but he was that important player for when he was substituted on. he got the goal that ultimately made the game a lot more comfortable, and it ended 2-0. So if we go back to the games, I think if Dan James were to pick up a suspension, maybe if he got a yellow card against Coventry would be the best time for him to do so, because I do think still against Sunderland, I think Leeds should get a result. I do think for Leeds, they should be able to win against Sunderland based on the current position they find themselves. So I think if there's any game that Dan James could maybe take the hit and take the suspension, it would be Sunderland or Blackburn, in my opinion. I think for the other games, he does have to make an appearance, I find, to have a great impact. So my thoughts within Leeds at the moment, definitely not straightforward games, but I do think their tougher games are at home at Ellen Road. And considering how strong Leeds have been at Ellen Road all season, I do think that's going to make things really, really good for them. And even with their away games, the only tough ones, I see teams near the bottom of the table. And that could ultimately be lowered in terms of difficulty if those teams get themselves in a more safe position. QPR being a really good example of that. So I do think Leeds have got quite a nice run in. I don't think it could have been as nice as it could be, but I do think Leeds have got it really good for them at the moment. A comment from Honeygun from the community poll is quite interesting. Leeds are unstoppable as of late. They reckon that he would do enough to get over the line, and they think that they'll win the championship overall over Leicester, which is crazy. I absolutely agree, Honeygun. That is absolutely crazy. And to tell you why that's crazy, let's cover Leicester now. Now let's move on to Leicester. So Leicester have been runaway leaders for a lot of the season. At one point, they had a 14-point gap from Leeds, and that has been reduced to 0. Now, it can be restored to 3 if Leicester win their game in hand against Southampton, which I think I will be repeating and regurgitating over and over again. But that game is very, very crucial and could have a huge say about the promotion picture. So Leicester, I do think their squad is very strong. It's got the highest squad value by far in the championship, and you can see that with the results that they've managed to pick up. They have been a breath of fresh air this season, and I was even able to see quite a bit of them against Chelsea in the FA Cup, and I was so impressed with a couple of those players. They have the most balanced team potentially from midfield, defense and attack, but they are not currently first place, and they're only 1 point clear of Ipswich. So one defeat for Leicester could make things very, very interesting within the promotion picture. Now let's look at Leicester's last couple of games. So you will notice that Leicester do have more games to play than Leeds because they do have that game in hand. They start off against Bristol City, where Bristol City are in a position that they don't have a lot to play for. Their April games, however, I think are quite interesting. So Norwich, I think, will be really tough because I think Norwich will be trying to solidify their place in the top 6. But Norwich's away form hasn't been particularly strong, as I would say. So I think Leicester could potentially win that one. Birmingham, I think, is going to be interesting because we are really going to see how Birmingham improve potentially with Gary Rowett now taking over as their short-term manager whilst Tony Mowbray is away receiving the surgery. Millwall away, I think, could be interesting, but if Millwall kind of get themselves in a really good momentum going into that game, I think Leicester could find the game a little bit easier for them. If Millwall are still in utter risk of relegation by the time they have to play Leicester, I think that'll be tougher for them. Plymouth away, Plymouth I think is going to be interesting. Now, I think at this current state, you think 3 points Leicester, but considering how far in advance it is, 12th of April, I'm going to make a prediction right now that I think Plymouth will dismiss Ian Foster by that time. And, shock horror, I think Neil Warnock will return to Plymouth Argyle. He managed them for a short period in the 90s, and ironically enough, Plymouth was the next club he managed after he left Huddersfield. So a very strange coincidence if you forget what he did at Aberdeen recently. West Brom will be interesting, but if West Brom have already secured or have almost mathematically secured their playoff place, I think Leicester could potentially pounce with the fact that West Brom don't have too much to play for. That Southampton game is massive. It's only 3 days after that West Brom game, but The advantage for Leicester is that it is at home in the King Power. Then Preston away, I actually think that might be their toughest game. Preston at this moment of time, if they have a good run of form and they want to get in the top 6, this will be Leicester's toughest game. If Preston fall away with their form and they don't look like they're getting into the top 6, I think Leicester could dismiss Preston pretty quickly. So this could be the hardest game, but it really is going to be down to top 6 circumstances. And they finally end the season with a home game, which is very nice, against Blackburn Rovers, where at this time, if they're safe from the drop, I don't think Blackburn, will really pose much of a chance or a threat for Leicester. But if Blackburn have every reason to try and survive, then this could be a very tough game for Leicester. So I do think, quite similarly to Leeds, there are some crunch games against teams in the bottom of the Championship that they got to think about. But I do think at the same time, circumstances, depending about how strong they are to survive or what they've got to play for, is really going to determine the difficulty of those matches. Let's now pull the graphic for injuries and suspensions. Leicester have been quite niced out, but they don't really have key players out injured. Now you can see with the risk of suspension, it's a little bit more thorough than Leeds' one. You've got 2 players that can feature quite regularly, Jamie Vardy and Wout Faes. I think Wout Faes would be the biggest loss that Leicester could have, because he has been fundamental in that back line for Leicester all season. But they do have fantastic options who can play in that centre-back position. And Jamie Vardy, even if he does have to take the hit and take a 1-game suspension, they do have an abundance of attacking quality that could go into this position. What best game that either one of them could take the hit, maybe if they took the yellow card against Norwich to miss Birmingham, that might be the best time that they could plan their 5th yellow card and take the hit from there. And unless they get red carded, I wouldn't expect them to get any more suspensions in the rest of the season. So that's certainly what I'll be doing if I was a player who was close to getting suspended. Going back to the community post, Vijay has left a comment saying, Leicester, they are so good. They are really, really good, Vijay. And I can definitely understand why they're your favourites to go up and get promoted. If they do outscore Leeds with their points, they will win the Championship. And you'd feel for how long they were leading the Championship, you'd feel that was quite solely earned. But it tells you, if you do keep your eye off the ball for just a couple of games, things could change really, really quickly. As I said from the start, if Leicester do drop points, if they do lose one of their games, they can only match Reading's points total. And do I see them winning all of their 9 remaining games, considering they've only won once in their last 5? I don't think so. But again, like I said, I think that form and momentum is now going to be wipe the slate clean. So I do think Leicester have got a big opportunity now to really kick on. And Bristol City, followed by Norwich within a couple of days for each other, will tell me if Leicester are really going for it. Now let's talk about the teams chasing for the promotion now. So let's talk about Ipswich. So Ipswich Town have definitely been the biggest surprise I find for this entire season. I think a lot of the pundits and a lot of fans included as well saw Ipswich were winning the Championship and anticipated a major drop-off. Now, whilst there has been a drop-off of sorts, I don't think many expected Ipswich just to drop off but still be within 1 point of getting into the top 2. That to me is sensational, and I'm still shocked considering most of the games I watch from Ipswich when I'm there at Portman Road, I kind of have my heart in my mouth. It's never really comfortable. Ipswich, likewise with Leeds, have only got 8 games left of this season. They do have to be the unique position to chase down the top 2, so they can win all their games, but they can still not get automatically promoted if they can only match the outcome of what Leeds and Leicester have done. So they are going to be hoping for results to go their way. Now, I do think for all of the run-ins, I do think all 4 of the sides will at some point drop points. And if anything, probably at one point, all 4 of the teams might even lose 1 game as well. So I do think it's really just down to whatever team is going to be the most consistent in this final stage of the season. If you look here at Ipswich's matches, it's very, very interesting, I find. So you can see here that likewise with Leeds and Leicester, they have got Blackburn to play. So Blackburn already have a huge say with the promotion race. Now, Ipswich have to play Blackburn in their first game. It's a live game on the TV, which Ipswich typically don't really do well on the TV. Within a couple of days later, it is straight to Southampton. Again, Southampton also have the top three within their final 8 to 10 games. So Southampton and Blackburn, Ipswich's first 2 games in the running, have a huge say on the promotion race. Norwich also have to play a team within the region of the table in Leicester. Now, the advantage that Norwich have is not only that they've got a really, really strong record against Ipswich, but also to the point where they are at home. And I do think Ipswich at home could potentially pick up maximum points, because I do think, with the exception of Southampton, I think the other home games Ipswich have, I think they could pick up 3 points in. Watford, I think by that time, you know, Tom Cleverley would have settled into his role, I think. So I do think Watford with Leeds, I think could be a tough game. But I think now, within a couple of games time later, where they play Ipswich, I think that will be a more, I wouldn't say straightforward, but it will be a more comfortable game for Ipswich, in my opinion there. Middlesbrough also having a little bit of a say about the promotion race as well, because they have to play Leeds. But the difference here is that Ipswich do have the luxury of playing Middlesbrough at home. Now, likewise with Leeds, Hull and Coventry back to back. But the difference here is that they are both away games. Now, it would have been Coventry first and then Hull. But you can notice here that Coventry have been moved into a unique time on the 30th of April 2024. That is because of Coventry's FA Cup semi-final game against Manchester United. Without that game, it would have easily been Coventry, Ipswich, and then followed by Hull versus Ipswich. I can't decide whether I would have preferred that. I mean, potentially I would have preferred Coventry to get them out the way and then Hull. You know, it is a very short turnaround compared to playing Hull and then immediately almost playing Coventry. But likewise with Leeds, it's back to back. So I do think Hull and Coventry in their own right, chasing for the top 6, have got a really crucial game on their hands. Now, if we're going to be looking at all of these fixtures now, we got to think about this. So by the time Norwich play Ipswich, that is the point where Hull and then Coventry would have played against Leeds. So they could look at that Norwich game, with it being an early kickoff against Ipswich. Coventry could look at that as a really good opportunity. If Norwich drop points against Ipswich, they could really up their game against Leeds and make things very, very difficult. But then on the reverse of that, you can see the games within Hull, Ipswich, and Coventry, Ipswich as well. With that being near the tail end of the season, that is going to be, you know, even tougher, with the stakes just being risen by each time you get closer and closer to the end of the season. So I do think Ipswich's games, in my opinion, are the hardest so far, because I think of the away games. I think all 4 of those away games are tough in their own right. That game against Blackburn is huge. I think they've got to win that game. They cannot afford to draw. Blackburn, currently under John Eustace, have been drawing a lot of games. A draw will not do Ipswich any favours. They need to win that game. There's no other option. Norwich, Ipswich have got a terrible record against. And then Hull and Coventry, chasing for the top 6. So I do think it's going to be very tough for Ipswich already. And the fact that they're chasing for it is going to make things difficult as well. We must also talk about their final game of the season against Huddersfield Town. If Huddersfield have already been relegated by this time, this could be a nice game for Ipswich. But if Huddersfield know that a result here could make them survive in the Championship, that again will be such a difficult game for Ipswich. So again, circumstances could change things, making a game seem winnable, but then turn very, very uncomfortable based on the stakes raised. So if you look here in terms of the injuries, both Donacien and George Hurst has featured at some point for Ipswich this season. Both have been now in that December period where we had so many games in a row. Both I don't anticipate seeing them back till the end of the season. The risk of suspension, though, is the area I want to put your attention. So, Lewis Travis, who has been a great signing since signing for Ipswich from Blackburn, he only needs one yellow card to get not one, but a 2-game suspension, which does terrify me a little bit, to be quite honest. We're quite fortunate in that area of the midfield that we've got great players and good depth, but to lose someone like Travis who can just put through a really good a needle pass to get good attacking opportunities and create loads of chances, that could be a devastating loss. Haladaki is another one I'm quite scared of. He only needs one yellow card to get a 1-game suspension. That has been picked up ultimately by either conceding penalties and time wasting, really. And considering the tough games that Ipswich have, with Norwich coming up, Southampton coming up, that could easily happen in one of those games. So that one I'm more nervous out of the other 4, actually. Sarmiento hasn't started every game, but every time I've seen him, I've been really impressed with what he can offer. So if he gets a 1-game suspension, I think, it would have to be a game where you would think that the opening and the strongest starting 11 should be able to win without any concerns. But then Leif Davis, who I think has been one of the players not only in this season but of the whole championship season, he has been sensational, but he is only 1 yellow card away from getting suspended for 1 game. Looking at those fixtures again, this is really tough, honestly, about when to pick your suspension, because if they had the suspension against Blackburn, I actually think that might have been okay. But Southampton, then followed by Norwich, there'll be yellow cards without a doubt against Norwich. But can they potentially avoid getting yellow cards against Blackburn and then Southampton? I don't know. It's really, really going to be a tough one. Travis could be out for 2 games. And then for the rest, they could be out for 1 game. And that really could be the difference. Having your key players out to yellow card accumulations really could be a big part of it. So whilst Ipswich are doing fabulously well to stay in the race for promotion, I do think based on the fixtures and what they've been granted with injuries and risks of suspensions, I do think it does put them in a slight disadvantage. Now let's move on to Southampton. So in the poll, to remind you, there was not many people that were the most confident of Southampton going up, and probably I should have reworded that poll a little bit differently to give Southampton a little bit more of a chance. But I do want to spend some time talking about Southampton because I don't think they are out of the conversation as of yet. So if they win all their games in hand, which is 2 of them, they're tough games though, but they've got Leicester, but they've also got Preston North End. If they pick up 6 points out of 6, they'll be only 3 points behind Leeds United. But they could be up to 6 points behind Leicester if they beat them. In fact, it'll be more than that. It'll be 9 points because Leicester's 1 game in hand is against that Southampton game. So that is massive, because if Southampton win that game in hand against Leicester, it really allows them to close the gap on them. It means they don't gain an advantage over them, and in fact they can lower the gap down to 3. But if things do change, they lose that game and Leicester win that game, that gap extends to 9 points. So that game there is very, very important. Let's look at the remaining fixtures that Southampton have. So you can see here 5 home games and 5 away games, all tough within their own right. Coventry, that's the 3rd time I've seen Coventry. So they have got Leeds, Ipswich and Southampton to play. But the advantage here for Southampton is that they've got Coventry at home. The other 2 occasions it is at the CBS Arena, where they've actually already picked up a win against Leicester. So I do think that's going to be a tough game for Leeds and Ipswich when they do play against them. There's that Leicester-Southampton game I was talking about on the 23rd of April. I think that game there is so important. It really, really is, and could mean a hell of a lot within this season. With the other games, Watford are also featured again. They've got a big say. They've got 3 of the top three that they still have to play within this region and the final couple of games. Unique teams in this list of games that we've really spoken about are Cardiff and Stoke. You know, all the other sides in this run of games we've already spoken to about. I mean, Middlesbrough we've already spoken about. That's the third time we've spoken about Middlesbrough, but this time they're away from home against Southampton. I think it's Leeds where they have a home game against them there. So a disadvantage to Leeds, but an advantage for Ipswich and Southampton there. We've got Preston, where the only other time we see Preston is there at home at Deepdale, of course, against Leicester. Southampton-Preston, though, is one of the few games that Southampton do have as a game in hand, hence why there's a very small gap between Watford and Preston, but it is being nicened to the fact that it's in fact 3 consecutive home games in a row. Cardiff we've not spoken about because they are not facing either Ipswich, Leicester, and Leeds in this final period of the season. Cardiff, of course, beat Ipswich very recently, so maybe that could be a tough game for Southampton, but I do think at this point it's going to be difficult for Cardiff to get into the top 6. It's quite late on in the season, so I do find that I think Southampton should be able to take advantage of that. Stoke is an interesting one because we've not spoken about Stoke yet. We've spoken to pretty much all the other teams fighting relegation, but this is the one game Stoke have against the top 4, which could potentially make things a little bit challenging for them, and it's a away game as well. Southampton, you know, they'll be going straight from that result against Leicester. If it's a win, they'll be really right up for this game. If it's a defeat, that game against Stoke could be a bit of a banana scheme for them, especially if Stoke need 3 points at this point of the season to survive. If Stoke establish survival at this time, I think that could be a pretty winnable game. So there's, once again, loads of if, buts and maybes with that. And then, of course, Southampton end the season against Leeds United, like what we've already spoken about. So Southampton are the one unique team in this scenario that actually have to face the entire top 3. And they are all away from home games. But, and this is a big but, considering that Leeds have not lost at home this season, if Southampton do pick up 9 points in those 3 away games, that makes things very, very exciting for me, because it means that all the top 3 would have been halted within their form and momentum, and it means Southampton would have really closing the gap on every one of these sides. So a lot to go and to happen for that to happen, but if it were to happen, my goodness me, that'd be very, very exciting. So if we look here in terms of the injuries and suspensions we've got to think about, or players at risk facing suspension, Narias has not really been featured. Sulemana neither has really been featured. Ross Stewart we already knew about. We knew he was going to be out for the rest of the season, and it's a shame really that he can't be involved at all till the end of the season. The risk of suspension is what I want to drag your attention to. So we don't have a situation where a player's at risk for a 2-game ban like we had with Ipswich, but they are players that can chip in and be quite important. Stuart Armstrong doesn't always start, but can be important and called upon. Ryan Fraser, again, not always starting, but can be a very important player and one of the more experienced players that can be called upon. Carl Walker-Peters is the one that stands out to me. He has featured so often in Southampton starting 11. He is one of the fullbacks, or one of the best fullbacks in the Championship this season. So if they lose him to a game, considering the tough games that Southampton have in their last 10 games, that could be quite damaging. And Che Adams also has 1 yellow card left for suspension, but the advantage that Southampton have is that they have Adam Armstrong, who could fill in just as long as he's not injured. So if we go back to the fixtures, what would be the best period for Southampton to maybe get those players suspended? Maybe when they have their streak of home games. So I would say Coventry, I think, would be the best game to maybe get those suspensions. Serve their suspensions against Watford, because I think by that time, like I spoke about with Ipswich, I think now the dust would have settled with Watford, and whether they improve their form around this time is, you know, difficult to know. I think the only team out of the top 3 and 4 who will find Watford a difficult game is Leeds, considering that they'll be going into this game with Watford having a 100% success rate at the moment, new manager and a new managerial bounce. So I think that is what I state in terms of my views regarding the fixtures and the injuries. So Southampton definitely have some nice ones, but they have a monumental say about who is getting promoted from the Championship. Honestly, this whole breakdown has been quite a headache to do, but my goodness me, is it just exciting to see who is still, within the mix of getting promoted. Now, to go back to my predictions. So let's list my predictions now. So I have done the table calculator for this, gone through all the games. One thing I cannot predict is, the motivations of the opposition teams, whether they're fighting top 6 still or fighting relegation still. Are there any players serving suspensions? I can't foretell when that's going to happen. I don't know what fresh injuries or fresh suspensions we can get either. So right now, it just really comes down to guesswork. So 4th place to me is Southampton still. They have got by far the toughest toll that they're going to have to perform to try and get automatically promoted. It's not impossible, but considering the gap that they still have to try and breach despite having 2 games in hand, it is going to be very, very difficult for Southampton to go up, in my opinion. And I think it seals it for having 3 away games against the top 3. Unless they pick up a good result in a couple of them, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. 3rd place to me, 3rd place, I've projected to finish on 95 points. So 95 points to get a playoff place. You need to tell me in the comments down below if that's the highest points tally for a playoff team. It's Ipswich Town. I've got them in 3rd place on 95 points. I have predicted 2 defeats, which I think have come from 1 home game and, if I know, it's 2 away games. I think Norwich and I think Coventry will be the 2 games that I think Ipswich could come unstuck in, but the rest of them have either been wins or draws, in my opinion. So 95 points is still amazing. It's 14 points in their last 8 games, so it's just under 2 points a game, which I could realistically see happening. But the top 2 who I think will be going up are actually tied on points. It is Leeds and Leicester, both on 100 points. Now, Leeds are ahead of Leicester actually because of goal difference. So I'm going to put Leeds first and Leicester second still, which might sound really, really boring to you guys, but I can't help about momentum in this point of the season. Had Leeds not played their game against Millwall, Leicester would have still been top. And if I would have said Leeds first and Leicester second, you probably think, oh, that's a bit interesting. So it is the exact same top 4 in short, but I do think it's going to end with Leeds and Leicester having the same points. And I think Ipswich will have a 5-point gap in the end. So they've done so well, Ipswich, to keep the gap to 1 point. But personally, I do think with the difficulty of their fixtures, the players that they risk getting suspended with the crunch games coming up soon as well, I think that might be just a couple of scenarios that just push Ipswich for me as a team that will have it really difficult to go up. So I think it will be Southampton 4th, Ipswich 3rd, and then the top 2, Leicester 2nd and Leeds United 1st. Those are my top 4 predictions, so that will give you a sneak preview of what my final table predictions will be as well. So guys, to go back from the question from the start of the video, who is going up from the Championship? In my opinion, Leeds 1st still and Leicester 2nd, but both exceeding 100 points. That might be a prediction you didn't expect, but I'll be very interested to know of your thoughts. Please tell me your thoughts and predictions of the promotion race in the Championship in the comments down below. Next time I'm going to be talking about the race for the top 6. So that's going to be a very, very exciting video to break down. If you guys enjoyed what you saw, please smash the like button. It really does help. Please do hit the subscribe button too. It really helps to grow this channel. And please share the channel too if you do want to see more of this content. It really does help the growth of this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are legendary on the end of this video. And as always, I'll see you guys soon. Take care, everyone.